Okay, we are about to start our opal journey. Now, Cole and I travelled to all over Australia. Oops, I want to be right on the first one. Okay, I need to leave it like this so you can see our PowerPoint, because that way, if I have any issues with people joining or not joining, I can easily do it without having to go back to screen share. Okay, so basically it's all about Australian opals and how we got hooked in something that seemed sort of quite absurd, really. So in 2015, we decided to go on a road trip. We did have slightly better accommodation.
Yeah, that's me at the wheel there, but we weren't going very fast.
So we started off obviously from Tasmania. We went across to South Australia, up the Coorong, and to the Port Augusta Arid Gardens. If anybody hasn't been to the Arid Gardens in Port Augusta, they are the most amazing arid gardens.
Fantastic. And that top picture is the entrance to the port that I professionally crayfished out of in South Australia. To give you some idea of the risks we took most days.
So this is where we went. Okay, so we went from Tasmania across here to South Australia, and then we headed up inland, went to Andamuka, and eventually to Cooper Pedy. Then we went right up into the Northern Territory to the Tanami Desert. Oh, and went to Uluru and the East and West McDonald's. Came back down again, went to Arkaroola, and then way down south into York Peninsula, then back up through all the New South Wales to Broken Hill and White Cliffs, then along to Lightning Ridge and Grawin, through into Queensland to Koroit and Yowa, way back down again and home via the east coast. So it was 14,000 kilometres that we travelled in that 3 months. But on to opals. So interestingly, the first opals were found in Ethiopia in 4000 BC. Now, I actually have a fair bit of text that I'm not going to read in this, but if anybody wants to go back to it or have any of that information, just let us know, or look at the recording. But it was found all over the world, but more than 90% of it is found in Australia. The first opal in Australia was found in 1849. Well, this is your area now, Joe. In the supercontinent of Gondwana, where about 500 million years of it, we had an inland sea, and this is where roughly the inland sea would have covered Australia, and it was really rich in silica, and as it dried out, that silica laden sediment settled all around the edges of the inland sea, and that is where opal is found. About 30 million years ago, water ran down through the earth from that inland sea, picking up the silica from the sandstone, and carried that into all the cracks and natural faults caused by earth movement, but also decomposing fossils or decomposing things. And that was repeated time and time and time again. And that's the way that opal was formed. It takes 5 to 6 million years to make one mature 1 centimetre opal. So it's a long, long, slow process. Now, the way that opal needs to be formed is, as I said, this silica, and I'm certainly not going to read all this, but opal can be either coloured opal, or precious opal, or potch or totally valueless opal. And it's exactly the same mineral composition, but it's the spheres of silica within the opal that creates the colour. Colour is actually not in the opal, it's only by light. It's refraction of light that causes the colour of opals. There's lots of weird myths around opal all over the world. and which is interesting, seeing as 90% of it's found here, that it actually was enough of a unique stone to have these myths. The Romans ate it. Um, the Greeks believed that Zeus his tears turned into opal. The Indians believed that Opal was the goddess of rainbows who turned herself into stone, which is rather fantastic. The Greeks believed that it gave them the gift of foresight, insight. And in the medieval ages, the fair-haired Scandinavians wore opals to stop their hair losing colour. And throughout Australia, there's loads of myths. But basically, the rainbow serpent is the major character, and they were fearful of the stone, and no traditional Aboriginal communities mined the stone or gathered it or used it for barter or anything. More recently, there's certainly been an Aboriginal-owned mine at Mintabee. Mm-hmm. The rainbow serpent was supposed to have slithered across the land in search of water, and the water that he found was to do with opal. And of course, there's loads of paintings and Aboriginal art that feature the rainbow serpent in various ways. And so basically, our road trip became our opal road trip. And first stop, which I think was probably why we were hooked, was this strange little town called Andamuka. Has anybody else been to Andamuka? Oh, June has, yes. Okay. And you have, cool. Isn't it? It's really a very strange place. There were certainly Aboriginal myths around Andamuka, and that the rainbow connected with the land, and that's where the opal was formed. Andamuka was quite a recently found field. It wasn't discovered until 1930, and it's still significantly mined, and there were up to 800 miners working there in the fields. It's in the driest imaginable country, with the 5 inches of rain per year. But
if you're lucky.
Yeah, if you're lucky. The opal's not on the surface there, but it's only very shallow, from 3 to 10 metres down below the surface. So it can be hand dug. This opal here is known as the Queen's Opal, with 203 carats, and was given to Queen Elizabeth when she came here. This is raw Andamuka opal down here on the bottom. But what they also do in Andamuka is they treat an opal. The opal in Andamuka isn't completely set, really, is it? It's very recent, more recent opal. So they basically cook it. They cook it in a sugar solution, and then set it with sulfuric acid. Did somebody ask a question? No. Okay.
I'm Reese. It's Jo here. Does that diminish the market value of opals when that process is?
It's known as treated matrix opal, so it's still valuable as treated matrix. It's nowhere near as valuable as the naturally set, but it is certainly still valuable because it is so brilliantly coloured, and the opal itself is natural. It's interesting that what happens is the sugar turns into carbon.
Right.
And so that gives it that black matrix with the pockets of light. So it hasn't actually made opal, it's just allowed it to be seen.
Yeah.
But the Andamuka, when we arrived in Andamuka, this is the main street Andamuka. Okay, now we've told you that it was first found in 1930. So these houses are houses that were built in the 1930s and were still mined until the 1980s. Still lived in, until the 1980s. This house was still lived in until 1988. and this is probably one of the better built houses. This is obviously overburden that they've dug out of the ground. So the first couple of rooms are the house, and then you go down into your mine, and but just bush sticks for roofs.
And the thatch is cane grass. Cane grass grows anywhere where there's a depression up in that country.
And basically the roof is just the cane grass is for a little bit of insulation, but you can see the height of it. And this is the main room. So this room, the kitchen, was actually lined with hessian to stop all the debris falling through onto your meals. But these were certainly still there. Nothing in Andamuka is ever used just once. It's the tin is recycled and recycled and recycled. There's just no waste whatsoever in that town. And then after we left Andamuka, which we really were quite entranced with, we camped in the desert, and we saw these bright lights from way off, and finally figured out they came from Roxby Downs, which is just an abomination of an artificial town plonked in the desert. So people have no real sense of desert. All the trees were in the street plantings were brought in as great big trees. It's just it was built for the BHP big Olympic Dam mine.
Totally sanitised and very boring.
Yes. So after Andamuka, we went on to Coober which is still the biggest producer of the world's white opal. And Coober is, of course, famous for people and mines living in dugouts, and dugouts are fascinating. We had a friend who actually was living here in Wynyard, Virginia Bat, and she had invited us there, which was one of the reasons we went there. It wasn't, again, opal was quite recently found in Coober discovered in 1915 by a 14-year-old kid who had been with his father in a prospecting party. So he certainly was able to change their life rather significantly. The Coober opal is always mined fairly deep. It's at least 25 metres below the surface. And it's white opal that is generally, or white opal that's found in Coober mostly. It's more plentiful than any other kind of opal, and a lot of the colourless opal, the potch, will be associated with the colour opal. Sometimes very, very precious opal in Coober. Lots of Aboriginal legends about in Coober, but the Aboriginal name for it means man in a hole in the ground, which is pretty spectacular. As we said, we were invited by a friend to live in a cutout and a dugout, and you can see the way that the ground has all been mined and taken away for opal, and then the houses are dug in the sides of the hills, directly in the hills. There's no outside component of the houses in Coober. But that's the environment that it's in. There is not a tree to be found within a bull's roar of the place, and all over the surface of the ground is glittering rock, but it's gypsum, so totally valueless gypsum.
And the beauty of a dugout is that it's a constant temperature underground, around about 21 degrees, day and night, summer or winter, and the ground is so stable that you can actually dig a house in it and not have it collapse on you. A few small rocks might fall off the ceiling.
Question?
Yes, Mal.
What do they do where is their water supply?
Now it's brought in, a lot of it's brought in.
They pump it.
Yeah,
from somewhere.
They do pump it from somewhere a long way away. But we'll take it on notice, Mal. Certainly, I know that there's running water in all the houses. They actually are piped along. Yes, Anne, do you know the answer?
Well, I think it all comes from the Great Artesian Basin.
No, not the drinking water for Cooper Pedy. Certainly, yes, they do have a bore for their water, but the drinking water is not bore water. So I'm really not sure.
Don't they?
Yeah, they have artesian bore water there. It's part of the Great Artesian Basin.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's very deep and not very nice.
Mm.
And that truck with the big drum on it is what's called a blower, and it actually sucks, and it sucks the small rocks and dirt out of the mine and blasts it out on the surface. And they have these old trucks that don't go anywhere except from mine to mine, blowing dirt out of the mine.
And then they put in a tumbler, and a lot of the softer sandstone is tumbled off the harder opal.
Danny and I had the privilege of being invited to somebody's dugout, somebody we met when we were in Cooper Pedy, and you imagine it's going to be primitive accommodation, but this dugout had a grand piano, it had a dining room with glorious furniture in it. It was really quite a sensational house once you were there.
Absolutely, yeah,
right.
yeah. The place we lived in was not.
Yeah.
Did somebody else want to say something?
Danny just.
I just said it also not only had a front door, it also had a back door.
Yeah, and skylights through to the air.
And the interesting thing about dugouts is if you don't live in them, the rock sort of slowly falls to pieces and crumbles, and the ceiling gradually falls down in small pieces. Whereas if you live there, the moisture from cooking, breathing, and all of that keeps the rock more stable.
Oh.
Okay, so here you can see where, again, this is another area of dugouts that's all been completely dug out here, this central bit for mines, and then the houses are through the edges. You can see the hot water systems they've got on the roofs here, just with the those tubes. And then Virginia from here was a mine tour guide, so she took us down the mine and showed us this is one of the no longer used mines that's used as a tourist mine. And what Cole's doing, although you can't see it clearly, is he's divining for the opal seam that ran across the ceiling there in the mine. Now, it was really interesting because the greatest cynic of them all is known as Cole Myers, and he could not stop the wires moving when he crossed the seam. So it's.
I was a convert.
It's
a reluctant convert.
Very, very interesting. So not only did we have the opportunity to go in the mine and have a look at how the mine worked, but we were also taken where they were making a new house. And now, so they just use exactly the same mining machinery to grind away the rock, and then it gets sucked outside to be looked at for the potential of opals. And of course, they were not allowed to any longer mine in the residential area of Cooper Pedy. So everybody had a great need of a new room just in case there were opals in it. So they kept on digging through. And sometimes it was really hard to know exactly where you were on the, on the Earth's crust, if you like. So people would dig a hole and they'd end up in their neighbour's bedroom or bathroom or whatever.
Yeah, they occasionally broke through. But that machine there, they were quite fantastic machines, designed low profile to go down mine, down tunnels, down drives and stuff. And these marks on this picture here are the tooth marks of the bit part of the machine which ground the rock away.
Just rotated with teeth and ground it away. Now, these are specks of dust in the air, but also the human breath, because this was a new mine, and the earth would gradually absorb all that moisture and keep it from being from crumbling down, as Cole said. Cooper Pedy is very famous for it's got an underground hotels and galleries and all sorts of things, and the proof of it being on the edge of the artesian basin is it is not uncommon to dig up great clumps of fossilised mollusks. There's not a lot of other fossils found in Coober Pedy, but there are in the other places. And just the extent of the mining, they certainly, in Coober Pedy, they frequently have these big darkened boxes that are called light boxes, where they run ultraviolet light, which will shine on any scraps of opal in the rock dust, and they're able to find them. It's the only place the only field in Australia where the light boxes are used.
Yeah, they call it the black light box.
And here's some opal from Coober Pedy. This is white crystal opal, so that's in the rough. That's how it's found, and then polished up. Can be very, very valuable. It's one of I find it the least interesting opal, actually, the white opal. I like the darker ones. But,
and photos never do it justice either, as any of you would know if you've seen good opal in the flesh. It's fantastic.
It's the sun. Now this is the potch, or the valueless opal. So it's just as hard and exactly the same chemically as minerally as the valuable opal, but it is in this case white, but it can be any color, and it's still lovely as a semi-precious gem. Now here's a graphic on how the color is produced. Now we said before that the silicon forms spheres when it goes through the cracks. It's just the natural way that the silica forms. So what it does is it will tend to form irregular spheres like this, where there's some big ones, some small ones, and they're sort of pushed together into a space, and that makes potch. When they're regular in size and they form a regular shape, then they will show colour. It's not the silica that's showing the colour, it's the gaps between the silica that's showing the colour. So as you can see up here, when they're formed regularly, the light will refract off them, and the biggest spheres are the most the rarest, and they are the ones that are most difficult to form regularly, and so that's the red light, and they're the ones that red is always the most valuable of the opals. Down to the blue is the smallest spheres, and so that they are easier and more common, and you more often get a big blue opal rather than a big patch of blue colour. And whereas the red is often seen in what they call fire, when there's flashes of the red, because there's just a few red spheres somewhere in the stone. Has anybody got any colours, questions about the way that colours formed? Because I find that's probably the most fascinating, really. Okay.
I just have something, Reese, which is, I'm not sure about this, but if the opal is under the ground and it's formed under the ground, then can it be seen without a light?
Not underground, no.
And so it's just formed under the ground, and then when it comes out, it shows the light.
That's right. They all, when they're mining, they always use light, either torchlight or whatever, to see where the opal is. It is very, very hard. So when they're mining, they tend to mine, when they have hit a seam, they mine by hand so they can hear it as well.
Oh, okay.
But
it's in quite soft sandstone, and if you hear a clink on your pick or shovel, you stop immediately and you go in with finer instruments, probably a pocket knife, and very carefully winkle the opal out of the base sandstone.
So even when they're using big machinery, if they're using an excavator, they will very frequently have a person standing at the face of the rock listening for the excavator teeth hitting something hard, and they'll stop the excavator immediately, and then they go in by hand.
Are they always in small chunks, or can they be in huge chunks?
The biggest, they can be in huge chunks, particularly the boulder opal can be in really big chunks, but they tend to be in seams and fairly small patches of rock.
And if you find a big chunk, it's usually infused with worthless matrix, you know, so it's not a solid. Most of it won't be a big solid opal. It'll be sort of swirled around in the parent rock.
Yeah, so crystal opal or precious opal is rarely, you know, like the biggest one would be the size of your hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
But that would be worth a lot of money.
Like millions and millions.
We've got a picture of one that's insured for.
Yeah, like
We'll get to that in a minute anyway.
Okay. So after Coober Pedy, we headed away from Opals and we went into that magnificent desert country north of Coober Pedy, where the rock formations are just absolutely astonishing, and lots of Aboriginal stories about what those. Oops, I went too far. My mouse took me to the wrong place. Sorry, people.
It went feral.
It did go feral. So lots of Aboriginal myths about these formations. They named these ones. This is the yellow dingo and the white dingo. So lots of really interesting places. Further north, we went, of course, to Uluru, and for the original atheist, I was just amazed by the spirituality of the sense of being near Uluru. It was a magnificent place.
She nearly talked herself out of going because I'd been there before, but I said, I think you'll like it. Anyway, she begrudgingly went and she loved it and had to go and actually touch it. It was kind of a moving moment.
It was very moving. Went through the West MacDonnell Ranges. These are the last, these wiggly palms, Liverstonia palms. It's one of the last, they're a real Gondwana plant.
Remnant,
yeah, just a remnant example. And the magnificent rock gorges. You just, you know, couldn't have enough of the rock gorges. They were beautiful. Went through Albert Namatjira country, and you could just see his paintings. Everywhere you looked, you could see a Namatjira painting in your mind. Near Hermannsburg, we went to a couple of gorges where whites were welcome to go, and found a lot of fantastic petroglyphs on the rocks at the Roma Gorge, and the way that the water over millennia had worn down these gorges. We saw some more amazing rocks. This really was a rock trip. We went to the Rainbow Valley north of Alice Springs, and to the Henbury craters, meteorite craters. You been there, Joe?
I have.
Who's the eye?
No,
Yeah, I've been to Henbury.
Oh yeah, cool.
Cool.
It's certainly, Joe, you should go there one day. It's just 9 craters where a meteorites broke up into pieces, and they're still really obvious. And all the pictures are there in the rocks.
And in fact, that happened in Aboriginal times. So there is in Aboriginal storylines there is talk of that meteorite coming to Earth. It was only thousands of years ago rather than millions.
Yeah.
And we went through miles and miles and miles and miles of flat, dusty roads. But then we headed up to the Tanami Desert, where there's ephemeral wetlands, salt water and fresh water. It was just amazing. And these flowers that just were everywhere. In the middle of the desert, suddenly you'd get these delicate little flowers. Lots of really interesting.
What time of year was it, Therese?
Sorry?
What time of year was it?
Winter, so May, June, July. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean there'll be water or flowers there. So they only come after a rain. And there had been a rain that year.
We were lucky, that had a bit of a wet, yeah.
And we saw lots of tracks of interesting animals on the sides of the road. All the dingoes followed the road. It was great to be able to sort of see what was there by the tracks.
And there in the Tanami, they've just recently, Australian Wildlife Conservancy have fenced off with the predator-proof fence 63,000 hectares, and reintroduced endangered little mammals, and they're thriving and doing well apparently.
And so we kept on going. So we were basically heading east now, and we went past all the mound springs, which were absolutely fascinating, where the artesian basin water is still naturally bubbling out of the earth. Interesting, many of them are now dried as the artesian basin is getting lower and lower and lower. Whoever's just joined, is it you, Bob? I think you need to mute yourself, please. You are muted? Yep. That's okay. Somebody's not muted. They need to mute themselves.
Oh, I think it might.
Because the cockies have pumped so much water out of the artesian basin, a lot of the springs, as Reece said, have gone dry. And in the background of that top photo, you can see that flat-topped hill, and that is a giant mound spring that's dried up, and now it's just a flat-top mesa. But some of them are quite enormous, and it's sediment brought up from deep underground by the water.
Yeah, and very mineralised, which is why the mound springs are actually, the mesas are built up out of the mineralised water as it dries out. And we camped in the desert, burning railway sleepers from the original Ghan Railway, which was rather cool. And weird, huge art on the U3AW track, which was rather splendid to see.
Those legs of that skeleton there are differentials out of trucks, gigantic diffs. So I'll give you some idea of the scale.
And magnificent desert sunsets. You couldn't get sick of those. And then after we left the Tanami Desert, we went for more rocks. We went up to Arkaroola in the Flinders Ranges, seeing these fantastic vugs made with crystalline in the rock. And again, the geology of that place, as Joe well knows, is just magnificent. We were lucky enough to have a tour guide who wasn't a qualified geologist, so we really got some fantastic information. Then we went south. So again, yes. So passing Wilpena Pound, another magnificent area, down to Port Germain with the longest jetty still existing, where they used to ship out wheat.
South Australia.
Yeah.
Sadly, Reece, I think the Port Germain jetties had the biscuit. I think it.
Oh, has it?
Yes, I think it got partially destroyed in a big storm. Can't remember, a few years ago, last time we were there, so it's not as it was.
Oh, okay. Well, that's 2015, so it's been since then, Joe, that it's...
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
okay, that's a shame.
Mm.
Right down on York Peninsula, we saw the wreck of the Ethel. It was still available to be seen on the sand. Then we headed back north yet again and went past Goyder's Line Farms, which is another wonderful, fascinating thing, and ended up at Broken Hill. And we saw obviously the wrecks of the old farms, and when we went to Broken Hill, we saw how many miners that had been wrecked by their occupation. This entire monument is just, each of those little white dots you can see there is a flower that has been put there with the details of how that particular miner died in the mines. Anything from suffocation to rock falls to...
crushed by machinery.
Yeah.
It just goes on, and I think there's 1,400 or something there.
Yeah.
It's some enormous amount.
Yeah.
Someone might be able to correct me on that number.
And along the dog fence, which was quite fascinating, and of course the beautiful wildflowers that amazed us whenever we saw them, including just driving around a dry creek bed and seeing a huge mass of sturt desert peas was one of the highlights of the trip. We had to camp by the longest place name in Australia, Lake Kadibarrawirrikana, which is rather spectacular as well.
That's in South Australia, in the middle of nowhere. And we didn't go in caravan parks as a rule. We never do when we go travelling. We just camp in the bush. We spear off the road if there's no fences. and just disappear into the bush straight.
And finally, on to White Cliffs. Now, Cole's sister lived in White Cliffs in a dugout because she was the park ranger for the Paru Darling National Park. So we were again really lucky to be taken to various places inside. So White Cliffs is just a couple of hills rather than White Cliffs. Those hills have been significantly flattened by the efforts of miners, and the whole area is just lined with these are shafts of mines. There are no warning signs, no fences, nothing. You can just fall in, and that's the last thing you'll do in White Cliffs.
They'll never find you. It's like an ant's nest, as it should be. Watch where you're going, in other words.
White Cliffs was one of the earliest opal mines. In 1899, White Cliffs was the biggest producer of precious opal anywhere. And but that was only like 10 years after it was found. White Cliffs is unique for the fact that it has opalized fossils, which is just magnificent to see. And it is the only place in the world where what they call opal pineapples are found, where the crystal of a mineral crystal of glauberite is replaced by calcite and then opalized. So it's a really rare mineral occurrence, and these pineapple opals are found there.
And it takes more than a couple of years.
Yes, again. So crystal opal, which is the most valuable opal, is where the light, it can pass right through it, whereas the opaque stones have flashes of colour, but the crystal opal is clear, and you can have black or white crystal opal. So here we have the mine field. This is just where you can wander around. None of these are current mines. If there's a current mine, it certainly does have a fence around it and a big piss off sign. And anybody being caught in somebody else's mine, it's still basically a shootable offence. But all of these old mines have just all this dirt around the outside of them, which has been dug out, and you're allowed to noodle, or which means just fossick, for chips of opal that you might find. And you do certainly find them, nothing of huge value, but you certainly do find the chips. Here's a current mine working, and that's all that it's got over the hole, just to tell you not to fall in or look in that particular hole. And the rock would be dug out by hand and put in that lifter to take it up to where it will be sorted. Again, people lived in dugouts, and we stayed in Shirley's dugout, which was a beautiful place. And unlike Coober Pedy, where they weren't mostly painted, in White Cliffs, they were painted right throughout. As you can see, there's a bed area that was just dug out into the wall. And they have light shafts so that light and air moves through the dugout. But again, the temperature was 21 to 22 degrees all year. Absolutely beautiful. And that's Cole's sister, Shirley.
The errant sister of mine.
So we have Cole looking down and up, so down into a shaft and up from a shaft, and making friends with a galah. Some of the mines were just left vacant, and this was a really good example. This one had been recently purchased, and a couple of old codger miners had just left it. They just walked out. So the first couple of rooms were living kitchen areas. Look at the whole wall that's been made with old cans, old beer cans, and the mine had just gradually started to crumble in. There were birds' nests all through on the roof. But
they're fairy martins, just for the record.
But the mine went through for several caverns, and there were still seams of opal there that could be used. So here's a picture of the opals from White Cliff. So that's the pineapple opal. You can see the size of that, Veronica, just within the fingers, and that's worth 30 grand as a specimen. But what they do also find there is squid pens, Belamites, and that one, because it is crystal opal, is worth $220,000. And this was one of my favourite pieces of jewellery that I've ever seen made from opal, unfortunately out of my price range. But that's a squid pen, and she'd made this squid on the end of it with gold as a brooch, which was fantastic. So this is opal, the crystal opal found in White Cliffs. So this is it in the rough, but it has been slightly polished, just enough to see. And you can see the bands of purple and blue through this one, whereas this has got all the colours in the range of it. Of course, all the opal towns have resident jewellers. Linda George is actually the jeweller that we met, and I really like her jewellery, and I've got 2 or 3 pieces of hers. And she just includes the opals from various places into lovely formed pieces. So why is opal as unique as it is? It's because of the fact that there are no 2 opals the same. That it depends on the size of the spheres. So that's why opal is considered the most unique. It isn't formed in a crystalline. It is not formed in a crystalline way at all. So if somebody's just called in, Cole will continue. There's opal crystal.
Yeah, there's just some examples, and on the right you've got teeth and shells that are partially opalized, and sometimes dinosaur skeletons become opalized as well, and some of them are worth literally millions of dollars.
Next slide. Sorry, there we go. Oh yeah, we kept travelling. Yep.
And we kept going out to the Paru-Darling National Park, where my sister was head ranger, and they're just a couple of shots there in the park of the petroglyphs and the emu, and at the bottom is that's the Darling River. That's what the Darling looked like then. It's even worse now, an absolute disgrace.
And not only was the river an absolute disgrace, but these little dots here are feral goats
stripping what's left of the vegetation, yeah.
So we went on to Lightning Ridge. Okay, so that was why we travelled past the Darling to go to Lightning Ridge. Lots of Aboriginal myths in Lightning Ridge. It's probably the biggest area where the Aboriginal communities were involved in it, but there's nothing that's positive about opal in their myths at all. But they're all there available if anybody's interested in it. Interestingly, the legend has it that the name Lightning Ridge was coined after a shepherd, his dog and 600 sheep were killed in a lightning strike early on, because it used to have another name. I can't remember what the other name is. Sorry. Now Lightning Ridge. We didn't like Lightning Ridge because it's a really popular tourist town and much more civilised than any of the other opal towns, which didn't seem to suit us.
It didn't have the same rough and ready character, which didn't appeal to us.
But we did like this sculpture. So for anyone who's been to Lightning Ridge, this is on the entrance to Lightning Ridge, and for some reason its name is Stanley. There was a guy who lived in Lightning Ridge who wanted to put this bird sculpture on the Birdsville track, but he couldn't take it all there. It was just too hard to do. So it was put outside Lightning Ridge.
And just to give you an idea of scale, as you can see, the body of the bird's a whole car, but the beak there is a Volkswagen bonnet.
And
So it's made up out of old bits of car and channel iron.
but it has this wonderful bird profile when you're quite far away from it. It's rather amazing.
Yeah,
And
it's
you can
pretty
see
cool.
again how tall it is with coal there. So Lightning Ridge, there you go. Wellangalla was the original name. You can see that the town is set out. It's quite widespread. It's quite a big town with a very salubrious main street that sells loads and loads and loads of opal. There are a couple of old miners' cottages that are there on display to show how they used to live. Not much more salubrious than Andamuka, but Lightning Ridge is all above the ground. The mines are not stable. They certainly have a lot of big open cut mines, but nobody's allowed to live underground. It attracts 80,000 tourists a year, which so therefore we didn't like it really.
Did you happen to notice the sign before you go into Lightning Ridge, which says population ?
Yes.
Yeah, very, very variable.
Yes,
When I
absolutely.
lived there, the number of mailboxes was 1,900.
All right.
And can you imagine there's probably 4 people to every mailbox.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Accident and Emergency said that their figures were around 12,000 people actually lived in the district of Lightning Ridge rather than the legal 2,000.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then
it was a place for a cash economy where you could work in the shooting kangaroo at night for $100 a day and in the mines for cash again. And so there was a lot of people there that were trying to hide from the law or marriage bust-ups or whatever.
That's right. Yeah, those towns attract all kinds of cashies, and there's millionaires walking around in a daggy old pair of shorts, and you wouldn't reckon they had 2 bob to get rubbed together.
And it certainly attracts the broken and the and the bizarre, all of those towns. Interestingly, at Yower, we don't know about Lightning Ridge, it certainly would be the case, but at Yower, in the week before their festival, a lot of American and German opal buyers fly in, and there is up to $2 or $3 million exchanged in cash in the week before the festival every year. And yet all of these opal miners say, oh no, haven't had much luck lately.
Oh, she's worked out, mate, worked out.
Yes. Anyway, so opal as gemstone. So 1869 was the first opal gemstone found in Australia, in Ada Vale, which is just north of Yower in Queensland. And it was difficult to get gems on the world market from Australia. There was not a lot of interest in it for quite some time, but a guy called Tully Wollaston worked very hard to promote it and sold it in England and in Europe and then America, and finally became sort of a popular stone. And he's considered to be the sort of the initiator of the opal industry, and that's 90 to 95% of the world market, 90% of the actual opal stone, and 95% of the world market. So this is at Coober Pedy, big flat dugout mine. So a lot more machinery used in Lightning Ridge than there is. Sorry, I apologise. Lightning Ridge. Yeah. So a lot more machinery used to get the rock out in Lightning Ridge, and that's a big pile of just the rubble that they consider to be overburden. And as the quote is in opal, that in opal mining, to find the opal, you need to move a lot of dirt. And that's the idea that you will only be likely to get one good opal. And everybody that's in opal mining lives for the next pickful, the next shovelful will have colour. That's what they don't talk about opal, they talk about colour, mining colour.
Reece, Joe here, did you hear about the estimated longevity of any of the mines? Is there any talk that they, I mean, Cole said earlier that miners say, oh, it's all gone, but in terms of Australian mining industry, is it an ongoing and
it's not an industry. Well, it's not industrialized because you have to do it by hand. It's not owned by any big corporations. It's all small fry. It's family businesses, the entire opal industry right throughout Australia.
It'll never run out, Joe, the opal, because it's the entire Great Artesian Basin, or what was the Inland Sea, is all opal bearing, but a lot of it's just too deep to be commercially viable. But it's there, so I doubt they'll ever mine it all.
okay?
And in some of if they go too deep for the opal, Joe, it's not what they call set. So it still has too high a water content, and it will crack when it dries out. So they actually can't go into wet opal. So if humans are still mining opal in another 5 million years, they will be able to go deeper.
For example, at Yower, I know they don't go any deeper. It's just not possible to keep the opal together if it comes out of more than 80 metres underground.
And that's the case with a lot of it. So these are Lightning Ridge opals. They're very varied in colour, but a lot of the Lightning Ridge opals have the dark background, and it's very, very looked for. This very interesting pattern here on the left is extremely valuable. That stone is probably about the size of the bottom one. But it's that, they call it a mackerel pattern when it's in the stripes of colour, which is extremely, extremely rare. Whereas the stone on the right, which has, although it has a lot of red in it, it's all very small specks and not as appreciated. And that stone is 14,000. Just to give you an idea, these are not even set in jewellery, so this is just the value of the raw stone, and then you need the jeweller. So these are these are seam opal from Lightning Ridge. So this is where it's a fairly thin piece of opal with a lot of the stone backing. So you've got to be really, really careful. And what they'll do is, you can see they've just polished off the edges to show the colour. So those three pieces are part of the same stone, showing the range of colour. But the seam of opal might be so thin that all they can do is polish off this covering sandstone and then leave the backing stone. Many an opal has been polished into dust on the floor of the opal cutting room.
It's quite a heartbreaking business. Can be.
So then we went on to another little opal field called Grawen, and it's only 50 kilometres from Lightning Ridge. I can see, Deanna, that you've been there from your smile.
He's a rock hound.
So Grawen is just a little weird little opal field in the middle of the scrub, home to a few strange characters and the paralysis tick. So people have got to be really careful, and they only camp there. There's no real houses, and it's very, very rudimentary. The mining, look at that for a structure for the mine. It's all very, very rudimentary, but a lot of good stone comes out of Grawen, and you can noodle on these great big mullock heaps. So truckfuls and truckfuls are heaped up, and you can see there's people there. When we were there, a man found a piece of opal, probably, where's my hand in the camera, that sort of size, a great big slab of opal that had been missed by the opal miners. But it's more likely that people are looking for pieces that are, fingertip size. but certainly there's quite a lot around, and you carry a little spray bottle of water to wet the stone. You can spit on it, but you soon dry out of spit, and you can wet the stone and you'll see if it's got any flash of colour.
You know that
So-
Lightning Ridge, Grawin has a huge population of Vietnam veterans.
Oh, yeah, right. So
And they've
don't go out at dark.
Yeah, and they've got the most beautiful small cenotaph out there.
Oh, yeah. And
Okay.
look what this local has done. He's put opal in his teeth. No reason not to, actually. It's perfectly hard substance to do. But he has his photo taken to raise money for the Royal Flying Doctor Service. So if you take that grin, you pay for the privilege. One of the opals that's frequently found all over Queensland is called boulder opal, and that's formed differently from all the other opal that we've been talking about. So boulder opal is formed where ironstone accretes to itself, which is similar, Joe, to those bubbles in the Montague rocks. So ironstone under the surface and in a wet solution will gradually accrete to itself, and there's the composition for you if anybody's interested. And within that ironstone or next to that ironstone will be the opal, the
silicon
Silic-
that's precipitated.
Yeah.
out.
But also it forms matrix opal, where the ironstone and the opal occur as veins or infilling between the grains of the either ironstone, sandstone, or basically sandstone or ironstone. Occasionally you'll find seam or band opal that's got ironstone either side of it. The other way it's formed is that pipe opal will form, where it will actually make a pipe of opal within the sandstone. And sometimes wood will have been there, so it may be wood under thousands and thousands of years ago under the surface, and that will gradually fill with opal, and so it's an opalized, fossilized wood. Fairly amazing. Much darker colour usually. And there you go, Veronica. There's you can see how that's band opal in there on that huge 30 kilos of opal rock. They're often boulder is that sort of size, and people tend to keep it as a specimen rather than as a gemstone.
There's a story in Yower of some boys had a mine. Their old man.
Might tell that when we get to Yower, eh?
Oh yeah. All
Yep.
right.
Boulder opal, as you can see, it's really interesting. Here's one with a lot of the ironstone through it, and that's only worth $3,800 compared to crystal opal below that's worth basically 10 times the amount, $35,000. So yes, we were there. We'd been to Growan, and then Cole said to me,
Why don't we go to Yower? It's only just over the border.
only 575 kilometres away, but nearly there.
I'd heard of Yower, and that's where the nuts come from.
And
in
that's
more
where
ways than one.
Yeah, it's where the nuts go to as
Yeah,
well. So
absolutely.
we went to Yower, and yes, so Yower nuts are formed differently yet again. They're formed where for some reason the ironstone has a hollow, and it accretes in an outside sphere, not necessarily solid. And sometimes the hollow of those nuts, which is what these ironstone small boulders are called, and they can be filled with sandstone, air, well not air, I guess, a vacuum,
Yeah.
and or opal. They say,
Sorry to interrupt. So they're like geodes, are they? Like
yes,
Yeah, nodules.
yeah, where you get amethyst and those kinds of.
yes.
And they range in size from your little fingernail right up to great big things that you can't lift.
But they do say you move a ton of earth or 10 tons of earth to find one nut. you open 1,000 nuts to find one opal. So they're often have the worthless potch in them as well.
But sometimes the best ones would be an ironstone nodule that might be, say, a bit bigger than a golf ball, and when they crack it in half, it's absolutely solid crystal opal, pure crystal opal inside. And of course, that's worth an absolute squillion.
Mm.
And that's what everyone hopes to find in the next pickful. We didn't. We found a few nuts. We even divined for them, but there was no opal bearing.
And interestingly, the Aboriginal dreaming from about central Queensland area is a very sad story, where it's a weeping opal, where if an opal or a rainbow appears, it's a sign that someone's committed a crime against the laws, and the tears of opal are falling in sorrow from that crime being formed. And there's although there's quite a big Aboriginal presence in that area, again, no opal was ever used by the Aboriginal communities in any form. So when we drove into Yowa, we were astonished because it actually has trees and gardens. Some gardens have plants and some gardens have trash, but there were definitely gardens. Yowa is different from all other opal fields in that it's a town that was formed by the original opal miners. It's within a large cattle lease, and the cattle leaseholder cut off 600 acres for the Yowa township, and you're not allowed out on anywhere to mine anywhere else. There's only mining allowed within that 600 acres around the town. And the town, of course, is now has a bore, artesian bore, which is the centre. And at Yowa, it's not too saline. You can actually grow the trees and the vegetable gardens with the bore water.
The bore water comes out at 60 degrees, and it's from, I think, 1,500, nearly 1,500 feet underground. So it's a seriously deep bore, but basically almost free water. So every house has hot running water. And the big deal is if you have cold running water, because everyone's got hot running water.
So you just turn on the tap, comes straight down the pipeline from the bore into your house for your hot water. It's pretty amazing. There's a woman there who feeds the local kangaroos, and so there's a lot of livestock that just wander around the streets. The cattle have rights over the streets, so it's as a householder, you have to fence the cattle out, otherwise they eat your garden. It's part of the stock lease. And the roads are paved with opal. So these are all Yowa nuts, as you can see in there. See this nut here that's been cut open in half? There's lots of them, and they're all worthless. They're filled with nothing. But you wander around the fields and you look for stuff that might have that flash of colour. And also, it's a lovely township. There's street art, all these wonderful structures that are sculptures that are made around the place from junk from the tip. And here's the what they call the Yowa Creek, which is the bore. You can see the heat coming off the bore as it's running it down along the street.
And that stream, the bore drain, runs right on our back boundary.
So Yowa has all modern amenities. The international airport genuinely is. It is in the week before the festival each year. International buyers fly in their private little planes. Thermal pools, like a lot of the areas, a lot of those towns, they have little swim baths, which are fantastic, and a really upmarket motel, as you can see there, folks. But also brilliant real estate. Look at this house here. These tins are full of old Yowa nuts that have been cut, and that's the foundations to stop the termites eating his little house. It didn't stop them, I assure you.
It looks a bit sadder every year that we go up there.
And this is our house that we bought from this woman. who's known as Kathy Tats, because she's totally tattooed. And weirdly enough, she used to be a prawn and a prawn trawler skipper, and Cole had met her in a previous life. Do you want to tell the story about the big opal?
Oh yeah, well in Yowa, one of the opal sellers and miners there, quite a well-established miner and very successful, had cut steps down to their mine, and his two sons always reckoned they wanted to dig the steps up to see what was under the steps, and the old man wouldn't let them. Anyway, this particular time the old man went for a holiday to the Gold Coast, which is straight east from Yowa, and the boys got into the steps and they dug up a big chunk of opal that in the rough was worth $550,000, and they loaned it to the museum.
Well, it was the biggest boulder
opal ever at that stage found, and then the bloody government didn't want to give it back to them.
Wouldn't buy it, but wouldn't give it back.
Yeah, wouldn't give them the money for it. Anyway, eventually, cut a long story short, they got it back and they cut it up, and God knows how many squillion they made out of it, and good luck to them.
But it was such a shame that the biggest opal ever could have been displayed for $500,000
for posterity,
bucks.
Yeah. It was literally a national treasure.
Now, Yowa has a large area set aside in pretty close to the middle of town for fossicas, and the proper miners are not. If you've got a miner's license, you're not allowed to dig in the fossicas area, but anybody else can. So there's always willing diggers out on the in the field, and this is a little mine area our group had dug out, and here we are. We actually got a couple of wires to what's the word? Divine for the seam. And here's a picture of our friend, and the wires were literally crossing, making her hands cross every time we walked across a seam. So we dig it up, and we did find lots of nuts. We
but not one opal.
No opal.
Tons of nuts.
But people always say to us, where is Yowa? So basically, if you go straight east of it, you get to the Gold Coast, and if you go straight south of it, you get to Melbourne and Wynyard, basically. So we just go directly north of Melbourne. It's in Queensland, in the southeast corner, southwest corner, the other east of Queensland.
In the Mulga lands, it's all rangeland.
Yeah, we love the scenery.
Yeah, it's getting buggered up by feral goats and overstocking, but generally it looks reasonably okay as far as Australian landscapes go.
But this is what is found in Yowa and what brings everybody there. There's a couple, well, they're no longer a couple, but their collection, the Maguire's collection. And the Eddie Maguire does this amazing polishing of specimen rocks. Tanya does all the jewellery, and he makes all these magnificent things. So this is the opal, the matrix opal. So it's got bits of ironstone in with the opal colours. And here is a picture opal, and they're very much sought after, where there's a picture, and they're often named after what the picture is. Here's some opalized wood that Eddie's just polished back, so you can see it. That's obviously accreted in a sandstone accretion, and he could certainly dig those out. They would make, that's jewellery quality opal, but their collection is worth $100 million or something.
Ludicrous amount of money.
Yeah, but fabulous pieces. And that's the official opal field, where, and you can see the claims, and nobody's allowed to walk there. It's and people do, but by crikey, you'll be watched, and everybody will know that you've been walking on the fields. They don't like it at all. It's very much a gentleman's agreement that everybody leaves well alone. But this is what Cole was talking about, and that's what people search for. So Joe, that's unpolished. That's just been cracked in half, and that's a pure crystal opal filling that nut. You can see the size of it. The opal's not big, but it doesn't have to be. That's thousands and thousands. That's probably a year's salary in that opal alone.
Yeah, you'd buy a couple of Toyotas with that, I reckon.
So the wires, the divining wires, are reacting to the water in the silicate. Yeah.
Yes, to a fault, a slightly moist area of the rock where there's a bit of a fault line, or old tree roots have broken the rock a bit, or something like that.
And are they used in all the field?
They are. The trouble is that all they do is show you the fault. They don't show you really where opal is. So yeah, they're used when people know when they know they're going to be getting to seams, but they're not used very much. There's another way that shows the seam, and that's the wild apricot tree, which is not an apricot tree at all, but it's called a native tree that it has incredibly long roots, and that will grow over a fault. So they murder all those trees. Every time they see one of those, they dig up the land underneath it.
Reese?
Yes?
It has very deep roots.
Yes.
What do they crack that rock open with?
Either a pick or they cut it in half.
That one's been split with probably a geologist's pick, or a small cleaver. But nowadays they mostly cut them in half with a diamond saw, with a very thin diamond blade.
And sometimes if they think they're on a patch of good opals with nuts with opals in them, they'll just slice off a tiny bit of the edge until they see colour.
Yeah, you'd have your heart in your mouth.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But this is a local miner's place, and here where you can see these arrows, they are all Yowa nuts, buckets and buckets on top of the front of his ute. In just everywhere is Yowa nuts, and he employs a couple of people to cut the nuts in half and throw them out if they're no good. So that's what his entire driveway is made of opal nuts that have nothing in it. So here he is, and he's got a pile of little nuts there, and he'll gradually just polish off until he finds a little bit of colour. So first of all, you find your nut, and then you cut it. Here's the example where that's been cut directly in half to expose what's in it, and then you polish the face, and then you polish around the colour. So you basically grind off the accreting ironstone around the outside, just down to the colour, being very, very careful not to think it might be just a little bit better further in. But Yowa also has some amazing other things. There is a fossilised dinosaur poo with our dog sitting on it. They're not uncommon to find these fossilised dinosaur poo, and they occasionally have a bit of good chemical in them, but not often, because they're usually on the surface. And that's the view there from the escarpment at Yowa. So you can see it's not in the dry desert. It's dry enough, but it's in mulga country, so there's trees and animals and life going there. So we bought our property there, as you all know, and we planted trees which grew. It's rather fantastic, but we did have to have the holes dug for our trees with a 20-ton excavator. You cannot even, and smoke was coming off the tines of the excavator because the rock is so hard. At the festival, miners bring, or jewellers bring jewellery from other places, and this is what Cole was saying before. This gem here, which is pure, it's from Lightning Ridge, pure crystal opal, that's insured for $23 million. And they brought it in a glass box and put it inside the tin shed for the night. No security. It's pretty amazing. And some extraordinary jewellery is made. There's jewellery competitions every year, and this phoenix was rather splendid.
Reese, there's been, Maureen's just asked a question, and there's a couple of other.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see them, Joe. Yes?
Maureen, can you?
Oh, sorry, I just asked whether Eddie Maguire's exhibition is actually in Yower.
Yes, it is. His collection is in Yower, and every year at the festival he puts on like the shed is half full of his collection, and he there's a little like a local market every week through winter for the tourists, and he brings out a selection for that. But yep, he and it live in Yower.
And when's the festival?
Third week of July.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think it's being held this year.
No, they cancelled it this year.
Yeah, so it'll be next year. And in the festival time, Yower's population, which is 40 in summer and 250 in winter, swells to several thousand. And as we said, the money that's exchanged the week before the festival, all the good gems are sold the week before the festival to the buyers that fly in from Germany.
Where do all these people stay?
There's a caravan park, and there's a little motel, and every room in every house has a person staying in it.
Yeah, people billet them.
Okay.
In fact, we sometimes have people outsiders stay in our place.
Yeah, we had a local jeweller last time. And here's a local very strange woman and her very strange art. There's this huge spider that she made from that's not valuable opal, it's opalized ironstone. And her peacock and she makes all with tip rubbish. Her peacock and all of these are just, your teaspoons, souvenir teaspoons with a spoonful of opal in each one.
She's a character.
Yep. And more. Yes?
Sorry, Ray. I'm just looking at all of that art. I immediately think of Jen Laws.
Yes, absolutely. She'd love it.
She would.
And here's some more of the collection of the Maguire's collection. You can see I've just given you, that's just one cabinet full of the most exquisite pieces of rock that forms there.
And he mounts them in Gidgee and Mulga wood.
And that wood, which is all hand carved, is so hard.
In fact, Gidgee is the second densest timber on the earth after lignum vitae. It's 1,300 kilos per cubic metre.
And it won't float.
It doesn't float.
It sinks straight to the bottom. Joe, you were going to ask something else?
Anne had just put in I think a response to. Do you want to speak up, Anne?
Just unmute yourself and interrupt us, people. We can't see,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Okay, right. I put a couple of questions through, actually.
Sorry, Anne, I missed them.
No, never mind. No, I put them through on the chat line, but I crashed again in the meantime, so,
Okay, so what were your questions, Anne?
The question was, Yower nuts, are known by another name, I think, which I can't remember right now, but I have since then remembered. I think they're called thunder eggs.
No, thunder.
That's a different place, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that was in Western Australia, but I mean they still had those big nuts, and you cut them in half, and sometimes they're beautiful inside.
Yeah, but the thunder eggs have agates and things.
Yeah, agate.
Yower nuts have opal, so that's the difference. There's no agate in the Yower nuts.
Oh, okay.
And,
The thunder nuts also have a space in the middle of them?
so do Yower nuts, though. So
Yeah.
thunder eggs sometimes do and sometimes don't, and same with Yower nuts. Sometimes do, sometimes don't.
Yeah.
And your other question, Anne?
Just going on from there, that the they may not have much monetary value, but they're still very beautiful inside.
Oh, absolutely. The non-valuable opal is just fantastic. There were also other artists there at the festival. This guy had carved this snake on that piece of wood, which was just amazing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then that's it.
Good.
Then I remember the name Thunderakes and put that through as well.
Okay, good. So that was it for Yower. Basically, we finished with Yower and headed home. But you can see now why we were so besotted. So we're heading home. We went through Hungerford, which is right on the border of New South Wales and Queensland, and
in fact made famous by Henry Lawson. He wrote about it, and he reckoned that it should be called Thirstford, not Hungerford, because it's mighty dry out there. 036 so we offer
21334.
Can whoever's that is mute themselves, please?
Call from 036442.
Thank you. And then we went to a place called Byrock, and this is an Aboriginal waterhole, a drinking water system that had been dug out of that rock, which is pretty amazing. Through Kangaroo Valley and the marvellous structures there, and to Eden. And this is Old Tom, the orca that used to guide the whalers in to kill the whales in Eden. Rather fabulous too. Last few bush camps, so we stayed at Malakuta and Cape Lip Trap. I found a marvellous shell museum at Inverloch, and that was basically our last thing, and we came home. So we travelled 14,000 kilometres in 9 weeks. We'd seen 6 opal fields, and we didn't buy all of these at the time, but this is the jewellery that we'd bought. So this is Queensland Boulder opal. There's some chips, worthless chips from Cooper Pedy. This is Lightning Ridge Black Potch, but which is cracked, but it's sealed, and so it's got white lines to the black potch. This is Koroit, which is near Yower, and that's fossilised wood in a matrix opal, and this is a Yower ironstone matrix opal. And we're home, and that's it, finished. So I'll stop sharing. And now all those chat screens have come up, so...
Tell us your stories.
Yeah.
Ask us stuff. We might know.
Any questions or comments? Unmute yourselves, please, people.
Just about the festivals, you were at Lightning Ridge and you talked about a festival. Is there festivals in each of these opal places?
Yes, there is, and the jewellers, the sellers and jewellers go from festival to festival. Slightly different sort of clientele, if you like, in each place. The opals at Lightning Ridge are often the far more sort of gaudy jewellery opals. There's also more festivals down in they go right all the way down to Gold Coast and places like that. Yes, Anne.
Just a silly question. All these dugouts that we've seen in, Andamuka, Cooper Pedy and everywhere else, what do these people who live down there actually do for fresh air?
It's very fresh. The air travels from the outside in to the dugout and up through the shaft, so it's very nice fresh air. And the insects don't come inside. It's too dark. There's no flies inside.
And they have various ventilation shafts.
Okay.
Up through the roof. Yeah, vertical shafts.
All right. Okay, thanks.
If you remember back, there was a picture of me standing on a bit of a carpet looking up at a hole in the roof, and that was a ventilation shaft.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Anybody else?
Sorry, I was hoping to go to Koroit this year for the Irish Festival. Of course, it didn't happen, but when I do go, I'll know something else now.
You will. So you go to Koroit for that, do you?
Yeah. Well, I was, but it's because it's not on. But I'll go next year.
When's the Irish Festival?
Probably April.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, you can stay at Yower if you like. Yeah.
Isn't that Koroit, Victoria?
Pardon?
Oh, okay.
Isn't that in Victoria?
Yes.
Different
Okay,
Koroit.
different Koroit. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
onto it, Kathy. Yeah,
Sorry.
couldn't be more different, actually. Same name, utterly different.
Yes, I was astounded because Koroit's not even a town. It's just a field.
Oh, okay, Trace. Well, bugger.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask Deanna, you seem to have spent some time in the area, Deanna. Were you a fossicker or a miner?
No, I was a teacher at the school.
Right.
Oh, cool.
Whereabouts?
At Lightning Ridge.
Lightning Ridge, okay.
Yeah, 7 years I was out there.
Oh, wow.
Well,
You'd have some opals to show us then, Deanna.
No, only a couple of small ones I bought from some of the kids.
Oh, okay.
You'd have some yarns to tell us.
Oh, yes.
When was that? When were you there?
I left there in 2010.
Right. Did you know someone named Rebel Black who lived there at the time?
This is Tasmania. There's always a connection somewhere between people.
Yes. Rebel Black has filled my ear with the odd adventure, I can tell you.
There's some very interesting characters in those places.
Yes, the population was supposed to be theoretically 2,500, and the accident and emergency had nearly 12,000 on their books.
I can tell you this.
A lot of illegal money out there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Huge amount.
All
And
those
the
places.
richest guys out there still drove around in a 1960s vehicle, because he said if the minute you bought something new, everybody knew your mine had something good in it.
That's right.
That's right.
You never.
They'd be right onto you.
And the police never went out on the minefields unless they went out in pairs and they were back to back.
Oh,
That's how they operated.
rough place, absolutely rough place.
It was a wild place to try and teach.
Yep.
It would be.
But they said Centrelink was worse place to be in than the teaching setup, because Centrelink dealt with the adults and we only dealt with the kids.
Yeah, they were only apprentices for kids.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, anybody else got a question or a comment?
Yeah, the Gidgee. Can you camp up around Yowa in the bush at all? And
Yes.
Yes.
There's a big 40-acre free caravan park, which is in the Mulga and the Gidgee, and you can park on that. You just can't camp outside the Yowa township because that's the stock lease. But yes, you can camp in that whole 40 acres. Sorry.
Good wood for a fire.
Oh yeah.
Oh, Gidgee. Oh, it's fantastic.
It's beautiful Gidgee, but I was just wondering if it was still there.
Oh yes.
It is, and plenty of it along the roadsides where they've knocked it over with roadwork, so you don't have to cut the green Gidgee, but you'll need a few spare chains for your chainsaw.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's what we burn. We burn Gidgee all the time up there. It's beautiful.
Yeah, burn the bum out of your pans.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What was that comment? Sorry.
Pretty tough wood, is it?
Oh,
really hard and dense.
Wow, okay.
As I said, second densest timber on the planet.
Yeah,
And very, very dark and fine grained. And I bring some back each year. My brother makes various things with wood, with wood with good features, you know, and
almost impervious to termites. Not quite, but nearly.
yeah.
Right. Wow.
Brilliant. And after rain, the Gidgee has a particular smell which is evocative of the outback. If you spent time there, where you would know. Yeah, I can see you nodding there.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it's you get used to it. At first, you think, "What the hell's that stink?" But it's I don't mind it.
Along the highway, and suddenly there's this smell, and you go, "Oh, Gidgee!"
Yes, please. Yeah, that's right.
Annette, you've got a question?
I don't know, just saying goodbye.
Oh, okay. See ya.
See ya.
Okay, everybody. Now next week we have a break, so there is no Zoom next week, but the week after, Mel is going to be showing us how to improve our digital photography. So
I look forward to that.
Good,
Thanks.